I was walking down my block and now the cops are stopping me. I said, what you doing here? Like, why you trying to talk to me? I said, officer, what am I doing wrong? Let me get just what I came for, I really won't be long. When I told him I had children, he was looking at me differently. Doing what I'm doing, why he gotta clench his fist at me. I came about the dirt, but they still mad cause of my history. I'ma keep on going to the top until they sick of me. Steady protest, but I don't even see a change. Always hearing BLM, but is it really in your brain? Gotta see what's going on, cause we ain't all treated the same. Why so serious? I'm furious, cause this is not no game.
And I want to welcome you back to NBWA, New Brunswickers Want Action. My name is Neil Clements, Real Deal Neil, and I'd also like to introduce my co-host, Dr. Timothy Christie. Dr. Christie, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Neil.
And Mr. Matthew Martin, the President and CEO of Black Lives Matter New Brunswick. Welcome back to the show, Matthew.
Thank you.
Now, we've been very consistent on this show with the calls for action or the outcomes that we're talking about. Our outcomes are the criminalization of racial discrimination, a public inquiry, whole of government approach into systemic discrimination in the province of New Brunswick, and the injection of Black history and Black history education into the general curriculum here in New Brunswick. Now today, we have a very special guest on the show. Her name is Tanya MacPherson. I want to welcome Tanya. Welcome, Tanya, to the show.
Thank you, Neil.
Tanya, if you got a moment, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm with the Black Rose Nation, Holistic Sunshine Management. My husband and I have that business, and we're all about in Black education, Black consciousness.
Excellent, which is the topic of the show today. So today we're going to delve into what I think is a very important subject, which is, one, the history of blacks, and the history of racism in Canada, which is the overall discussion, but we're really going to focus on some contemporary discussions that are happening right now in the news relative to the racist nature of the education system and how it has not shared a full history with the general public and those who attend school. And we can talk about that using such examples as the recent discovery of the residential school disasters and genocides and the like. So, Dr. Christie, I know we've discussed this quite often, but why don't you discuss or tell our viewers your thoughts on those contemporary challenges?
Yeah, well, I think all of us could agree that people are generally appalled at some of the discoveries we're making in Canada. Mm-hmm. So everyone will recall that there's been thousands of unmarked graves found at various residential schools throughout the country, mm-hmm. where children who actually were forced from their families and taken from their families with the help of the RCMP, imprisoned in these residential schools and then actually killed. So some of them are, or literally thousands of them are living with unmarked graves, and we're finding on a weekly basis now hundreds of these unmarked graves at various residential schools, which were run by the Canadian government and different church organizations. Mm-hmm. So as a result, there's been a huge public backlash. So some people have been defacing and vandalizing monuments. So statues of Sir John A. Macdonald have been vandalized. Some have been taken down. Some municipalities have actually removed them. Mm-hmm. Some churches are being painted with red handprints or vandalized, and some even burnt down. Mm-hmm. So a lot of debate going on right now. A lot of people say, well, removing statues or vandalism, these are part of cancel culture, and you can't cancel our culture, you can't deny the things that have happened. And other people are saying, look, these things have no proper place in our society right now.
And I agree, you're saying you can't deny the things that happen, but basically our history is a general denial of the racist history of our country.
And I think that's probably where the discussion is right now, is that a lot of people were taught to revere, say, Sir John A. Macdonald. Right. They were taught he was our first prime minister, he was responsible for Confederation, and he holds a very high status in our country. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people might not realize how racist he actually was. They might not realize that he had a white Canada immigration policy. Mm-hmm. They might not realize the impact he had on developing residential schools. They might not realize that the original reason for the RCMP was to enforce attendance at residential schools. So when we have people in the public debating right now, they're debating, hey, he's our founding father, how can you take a statue down? other people are saying, yeah, but the reason you revere him is because you don't know the whole story about this gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of people know. There's all kinds of black people that know what was done. All kinds. I have these discussions all the time with people. I think white people need to know their history. I think white people are the ones that need to recognize that they've always captured and tortured and put monuments up to themselves. They've always done that.
Mm-hmm.
But we are different. Black people are different than white people. We don't have the same culture, the same traditions. Everything that we've ever learned from the school system has been from a white basis.
A white perspective.
A white perspective.
A colonial perspective, if I might.
Right. So in 20 years of doing this kind of work, what I recognize is that I don't expect white people to fix the problem for black people. They created it, yes. It benefits them, yes. We need to correct our problem in our own community. It starts with us.
But some of them, though, when they're taking down statues or burning down churches or saying we want to cancel Canada Day, or they seem to be wanting to be proactive. They seem to be wanting to contribute to a solution somehow. So
You mean white people?
yeah, absolutely.
In my opinion only, and it's again my opinion, I don't think that the tearing down of the statues, I get the symbolism. It's a strong symbolism, and putting the paint on the churches or burning, that doesn't solve anything.
No.
It's a cry of anger. It's a cry for help. It's a cry for understanding. But I don't believe that will change anything, and it adds fire to comments like cancel from Mr. O'Toole. He's able to say that because of what's happening, and people are a lot, in my opinion only, a lot of the folks who are reacting in that aggressive and sometimes dangerous and violent manner, which I get it, I don't think that some of them understand why they're doing what they're doing.
I think from
That's just my thoughts.
almost looking at it from kind of Tanya's perspective, but as well from Dr. Christie's perspective is, to me, I think it's almost a problem that although white people can't fix it, I think it's almost a joint effort, because if you look at our histories and our structures that we have today, if we look at our education sector, it's completely ran, curriculums are written completely by white individuals. So they can purposely neglect showing that Canada had a white Canada immigration policy for its first 100 years of existence, keeping the white Canadian population at the time at 97%, not letting Canada be diverse to what we see now, which is about 76 or 73-ish% in that kind of area. So for black communities to begin to try to solve these problems, I think we still have that kind of systemic issue where black community members can never get in the position to make any of those meaningful changes. Black people can't make the choice in our education sector to say, we're going to start implementing those, because our politicians all our head decision makers are white, and they're going to continue to keep kind of this colonized kind of traditions and culture that they've built from lies, from stealing land, raping, and they're going to continue this and not change that, and to have black communities, and I agree, there are definitely issues.
It wasn't for us. It was never supposed to be for black people,
Yeah.
right? So as soon as we as black people understand the deep-rootedness of our history, we'll realize, because you're saying, they're the ones who are doing all the curriculum, right? Like there's new native curriculum that white people are supposed to teach to the children in school. That doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. That's why I say we need our own self-government, right? We need to teach our own children about our own history, separate and apart from white history, because it's different. And our issues in our community are deep, deep rooted. There's a lot of people that don't know our history from beginning to now, And I'm more about teaching empowerment. How do we get black people power? How do we redistribute the land? Almost 100% of the land was stolen and taken. We have no resources, none of that. We need all that back. So if we want to talk about systemic racism, then we need white people to give us back what they took, right? And if they're not doing it, if they're not going to do that, because all this evidence is already proven, we were talking about it now, all the children that are being found We need to look at that and measure it appropriately. What do we do with murderers? Right? How do we deal with them?
I think that's fair enough. I think that the accountability for these things, and some of those murderers are still alive.
Absolutely, walking free.
And something needs to be done to them. But I think the idea that this is a black problem or an indigenous problem, I don't think I agree with that. We live here where I pay taxes. I grew up in the education system. I grew up in Moncton. I was born here in St. John. I feel this is my home. This is where I am. This is part of it. And there are structures in my society right now that are discriminating against me. Notwithstanding the fact that those structures were intended to discriminate against me, I think right now I can say there could be an ideal solution, so maybe the type of thing you're talking about. But between where we are now and that ideal solution, there are things we can fix in our society. And I think one of the things we can fix in our society is to rip open the history books, have a blatant, brutal, honest conversation about the reality of what we've had. And as you've said, many Indigenous people have said, we know there's a mass grave right there.
Yeah.
We know that. They've been saying it for decades and decades and decades.
Centuries, really.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
But people have ignored them. I hear you on that. But there is a whole segment of the population, and this is brand new. And I think there's something very constructive that can happen if we raise our consciousness collectively as a society, where we actually have real conversations that matter based on the facts, not based on a naive idea of history, not based on idealism, but rooted in the brutal reality of how racist we were, right? And it's up to modern day. So if you look at internment of Japanese people prior to World War II, we actually put them in prison camps here in Canada.
Yeah.
If you look at Jews who were trying to come to Canada for asylum because of the persecution that was happening to them in Europe before World War II, Canada had the worst record out of all developed countries.
Of accepting those people as refugees, etc.
Exactly.
Yep.
Or if you look at slavery, right? Hundreds of years, centuries of slavery. If you have 200, 300, 400 years of free labor, of course you're going to be a superpower. So the benefits and the way we are today is based on the backs of all of these situations that I've been explaining, and we don't look at current discussion based on that. So when O'Toole says foolishness, like he's been saying about I don't support this, or how can someone deface a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald, this guy's just ignorant.
Well, it's the same individual who said that the residential school idea was one of purpose. It was, we wanted to educate natives, not destroy their culture, and it just went wrong, right? So how can you make that statement knowing the history now of residential schools, right?
Well, I don't really want to talk about Aaron O'Toole and give more white people power, but just if we look at our history, just the fact that white people have the power and believe that they have the power to take someone from their family and put them somewhere to turn them white. I mean, we still live in that system of oppression.
Agreed.
Right? It's still like that.
Well, it's
and I
the
agree,
education system.
Right. But I homeschool my children and send some of them to school because I want my kids to understand the black experience. And they're not going to get that being taught in a white school.
Agreed.
We can't expect white people to teach our history to our children. That's why I say it's on us. It's on us to teach that history to the schools, right? To our children and to the schools. We need black people who are teachers to teach our history. We need all of our black people to know what our real history is, and they don't. And we need to quote black scholarship, not white people, and what they think of what we as black and brown people need to be part of their culture. Because I always come from the perspective of, okay, yes, we're black, but are we black thinking, right? Because we've been colonized. We're under their system of oppression. So we constantly have to be thinking, am I thinking black? Is this what we do when we're black, or is this like a white policy? So when we say education, I'm for it. But I want to know who's teaching it and what they're teaching.
Exactly. And
I don't,
carry on.
That's interesting because I don't know what it means to say I'm thinking white or I'm thinking black.
Well,
So,
I think if we read black authors,
But I have.
right? Well, I'm not saying you didn't, but I think the more that we read about black authors and black scholars who've been writing about this and who have actual documentation on how we can be separate but equal. Because when we say separate, everybody seems to think that that means, and I mean black and white people alike, they seem to think, oh, well, we're going to leave and not associate with white people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to do the education to learn who we are before we can go out into the world and do anything. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what
I'm
you're
not saying white people stay away. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need something that's ours. And it's not wrong to ask for that. Every other culture in the world has it, except for the North American black. And at one time, the black man was the only one that we wanted, or not we, but that the colonizer wanted to kill. But now we see that our women and our babies are in danger too. So they've tried to eradicate us, but we're still here.
Well, the
that
evidence
says
is also
something.
the evidence likewise exists with the First Nations cultures.
Right.
The evidence, the activities that you're suggesting they're doing to black people, well, it's much more obvious if we look at the indigenous community.
It is, and it's atrocious
obvious,
what
right.
they've done. But black people, but Native people have still managed to preserve their language and their culture in spite of everything that was done to them.
Right.
Right?
That's strength. Yeah.
And that's spirit, because they recognize and understand that it's more about spirit and energy than skin.
Right.
Right? It's deeper than skin. And once we realize it's deeper than color, because black is all shades, right? It's deeper than color. Melanin.
But when the police shoot and kill me because I'm black, it's not deeper than color. Like, there are certain things that just happen because of the color of your skin. Like, if you look at prison rates, Indigenous
The
people
stats are there, yeah.
are overrepresented in the prison system by over 900%. Blacks by, what is it,
500,
3 to 500%. If you look at people shot and killed by police, they're black and Indigenous at disproportionate, astronomical rates. So you're right, yeah, ideally, these things we should realize that skin color is a completely arbitrary characteristic. But the reality that we're in right now is that it's not. And there are things we can do about it. We don't need to have mass incarceration of blacks and Indigenous people. We don't need to have these shootings. And I think part of what we're having right now is with these public displays about the outrage with the residential schools.
I think they're a kickoff to the understanding you're talking about. I don't agree with the kickoff. I don't agree with violence. I don't agree with burning down churches. I don't agree with tearing down statues. Notwithstanding the nature of that history, I ain't going to forget it, and I think nobody should.
And I just want to comment on that because I hear you. Burning down a church is a pretty drastic thing. But, you know, maybe that church is benefiting from the racist laws we've had
But I
for
agree,
centuries.
and I'm saying I don't agree with those activities, but I know that they are a kickoff to the actual discussions that are going to be had. So maybe we need a little bit of
But are
excitement,
they
I'll call it.
genuinely something that's a kickoff
I hope so.
to conversations, though? Because we've seen, if we look at the Black Lives Matter movement in the States with all the riots, the conversation didn't happen from, why are they rioting or what's the stem of these, but rather, here's more angry black people out destroying a city. The same thing here now as we're looking at is, here we have individuals burning down churches and ripping down statues now. And to me, it's superficial of they're tearing these things down, but are they actually afterwards following up
it doesn't change
to see
anything. That's right.
to see, okay, where can we actually have meaningful reconciliation? Are they actually putting the work down? Or are they just doing superficial, like for the cities that are removing them willingly? Are they just removing it and that's the end? But at the end, there's no reconciliation.
It's a pretty easy thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
It doesn't take any effort
and
at all.
it's very media friendly.
Yes. But fixing the structures, changing
Exactly.
the way things are is much different.
So are those conversations even happening? We know in St. John, some statues were vandalized with some red handprints. They were immediately cleaned up, and then that was the end of it. Was any education brought through of why the statue was vandalized, why that statue shouldn't be there? Instead, they're just kind of, oh, let's just take it down because that's, what we're doing right now as a municipal kind of maneuver for clout. Like in the end, they're not saying, this is why we need to take it down. This is why we shouldn't. The same as when
There's no discussion. You're saying they're just
exactly.
cleaning off the paint and moving on.
It's very similar to in St. John where they just had the discussion about the blue striped patches that police officers are wearing. The city police said police officers aren't allowed to wear it because it's against uniform policy, rather than looking at why do these officers want to wear these patches and what do those patches represent? Those patches have historically been known. The blue line is, the line between officers and utter chaos and violence within society, where most people view police officers as violence and chaos in society. So rather than the St. John Police saying, why do you want to wear this strap or wear this patch? Why, do you understand the historical context of it? They just said, oh, no, it's because it's policy. The same way now is cities are just, oh, we're going to take down these statues because, it's the right thing to do, instead of offering that education to it and actually looking into the deeper historical meanings of it.
So in terms of our action items, NBWA, New Brunswickers Want Action. We're from New Brunswick. We're saying we want action. What is the action we want? What is it we want people to do?
I think it's really clear. We want people to disseminate the accurate information so that we can understand and move forward and have those discussions with real information, which is why our outcomes are asking for, well, one of our outcomes is the education system.
Exactly.
Right? So that we can share the actual history.
Right.
Look,
So when we talk about education, we're not just saying, give us a list of black people who have created things.
I know, I've done really awesome
tell
things.
us about slavery, or tell us about a residential school. But we're saying, tell us how racist your immigration policies were. Tell us how you built this country by stealing land.
Admissions.
How can you come to a place where there's a village, say on the Woolastook River, and say, I've discovered this place when there are people there?
How can you build a fort at the base of the river, at the mouth of the river, and celebrate that history, notwithstanding on the other side of that river, as you just said, there was a full village, which is not recognized anywhere in history,
but
a full native village.
Right.
Even to that point, I have to go back to Tanya, where you said, we can have this education, but having a white person teach black education, I think that makes a lot of sense to me, because it's one thing to teach the history books, to just read it out without understanding the real ramifications of how, policies and the laws of the past have, such big consequences on black individuals today. So I can totally see and agree where we need to have, we need black teachers.
We need black teachers, but look, here's how a treaty negotiation would go through. This indigenous group have to prove that they've occupied or been using this land prior to colonization. They have to prove this to the colonizer.
Why do they prove it? Racism?
Well, why do they prove it to the colonizer? Because the colonizer says, I discovered this. What I'm saying is, in school, we need to seriously analyze that argument. I've discovered this. It doesn't matter what color the person doing the analysis is, but it's that discussion that's happening. So I'm not trying to say just teach facts. I'm trying to say we actually have to analyze our history. We have to think about our history. We have to look at it. So just think about how preposterous it is for people who have been here to have the colonizer come in, have a court system, and then they say in that court system, you come prove to us that you've been here before we were. The default is they're legitimate. And that's what we're teaching people. But the conversation we need to have is the default is illegitimacy. The default is theft. The default is colonization and slavery and indentured servitude. That's the stuff that needs to be discussed. And that's where I would say, I don't really give a damn what color you are. For me, my mother's white, my father's black. I reject categorically when people tell me I have white or black, or I'm only white or black. That is completely irrelevant. I'm Tim Christie and I have thoughts for myself. And what I want to do is say, here's what I think. If this is illegitimate occupation of something, that the fact is we're 300 years later. There's no getting away from that. How do we teach that to kids? Right now what we've done is we've had a white immigration policy for centuries, where we have a country that up until recently was over 95% white. Now it's about 74% white. people now think that a white Canada is natural. It's not natural. It was developed, it was devised, it was intentional. So if Canada was able to develop naturally, it wouldn't look like it does now. So what I'm trying to say in the education system is the analysis that people provide, the discussion they have, the way they look at these and analyze these facts, that's what's important.
It can't be a celebration of all the great things that we did.
Exactly, and that's what we're not doing. So I'm not talking about teaching about slavery or Jim Crow or whatever. The facts is the analysis, the thinking, the absorbing of the information we've had, and all of the lies we've been taught for centuries.
Exactly. Well, that was one of the most interesting conversations I think we've had on New Brunswickers Want Action, NBWA, and I want to thank you, Tanya, for coming and actually stirring up some thought. It's a very different perspective, and we appreciate it. Me personally, I truly believe that all of the activities that are occurring now with the burning of the churches, etc., people like Mr. O'Toole speaking out of turn about nonsense, in my opinion only, I don't think that proves anything. I think the outcomes and the particular outcome of education is where we need to be focused and injecting that information and telling the truth about our history. That's my position. Matthew?
I think a lot of excellent points were brought up today by Tanya, but I think, you know, Dr. Christie, you've also brought up some great points that I think our history was so perfectly designed, much like systemic racism, we see it today, that it gains the outcome of keeping, you know, that kind of white colonialism idolization that our histories have been neglecting to tell the truth and the real brutal truth of how racist Canadian history actually is.
And how we got here. Yes.
Exactly, and I think conversations like what we're having today that are happening within our smaller communities, that are happening within families, are going to start seeing folks begin to do that research to see that real history. And I think over time we'll start seeing, you know, less of these kind of colonizers and more of, you know, our true kind of roots of how we've become the society we are today.
The truth.
Exactly.
Tanya?
I'm about the truth. I'm about Black power. I'm about giving Black power to people. Black people. We need power, economics, wealth. We need redistribution of land. All that was stolen we need back. And there's ways and means of doing it. It's written.
Yeah, I think, like these guys have said, we've been lied to for so long. We've been taught in really not an individual teacher, but the system in general has been pretty disingenuous. And what I would encourage kids to do in schools when they're being taught this type of foolishness is to ask hard questions and to challenge the establishment and try to speak truth to power and say, how could Christopher Columbus discover something when there were people here? How does that even make sense? And I don't remember when we were learning about that, anyone addressing those types of questions.
That's hard for the only Black kid sitting in the class to question a white teacher, though.
No, I agree, and that's a whole other discussion.
That's a whole other discussion.
Thanks for bringing that up in the closing. So, on the last note, I will say, being a history major and then going on to law, and having a very strong recollection of my experience, I'm just really disappointed in what my experience was. And I think that this show is providing accurate information, real data that people can talk about and know and be secure in the information. So I think that's what we're bringing to that education piece, and I think it's extremely important. But if that's not your belief, please feel free to reach out to us at nbwa@chco.tv. If you've got some commentary about this show and you've got questions, reach out to us because we want to know what you think. The purpose of this show is to provide information to you, the viewer. And we like to talk about these things, obviously. So reach out to us, contact us, and let us know what you think of the show. Again, I want to thank Matthew Martin, President and CEO of BLM New Brunswick. I want to thank Dr. Christie and our new guest and new co-host, Tanya MacPherson. That's right, you'll be seeing a lot more of her. I want to thank you, Tanya, for coming on the show today and telling the truth. Because we're all about truth here. And that's the change we need in this society, historical truth.